Today we're talking about the power of grace in our lives. And it's interesting how when you think about a word like grace, it's kind of hard to really understand what that means. Maybe you think about the name of a church down the street or something like that. Maybe we think about being gracious to other people, as in maybe being kind to them, maybe being patient with them, or maybe we think about being graceful. For example, a graceful and elegant woman wearing an evening gown. We think of that kind of grace. A smoothness of movement. But there's a more specific type of grace I'm talking about in today's video, and it's illustrated in a portion of a story written within the Pilgrim's Progress back in 1674, I believe. A man by the name of Paul Bunyan wrote a story about an adventurer who was departing from the city of destruction on his way to the celestial city. And this was a story that was an allegory for the journey of a Christian's life and pursuit of salvation. Now, what's interesting about that story to me is that it was written some 350 years ago. It was written before the fantasy genre was a thing. It was a religious story more than it was a work of entertainment. It wasn't meant to be fantasy fiction. It was meant to be inspirational. And it continues to be a beloved work of Christian fiction today. I listened to that book on Audible, and I thought it's amazing how much it stands up well to this day. And it's also amazing how much similarity it bears to a lot of the themes you would find in a fantasy adventure in modern times. The story of going on a journey, on a quest of sorts, to seek your redemption, to seek the fulfillment of that story before you, to reach some sort of a finish. And maybe there is truth, and this might be subject for another video I'll do, but truth in the idea that fantasy is all really just an allegory that we can use as an interpretive experience to better understand our place in the world. But back to the topic of grace. There's a story in that book about a fire which continues to burn. And one man tries to extinguish that fire continually. But it always continues to burn. No matter how much water he pours on the fire, it keeps burning. And then the reader is shown that secretly, behind the scenes, there's another man who's pouring oil on that fire. So it keeps having fuel to burn, despite the fact that someone is trying to actively extinguish it. And that's an interesting allegory, isn't it? Imagine you're trying to put out a fire and you can't put out the fire because there's someone behind the fire adding fuel to it constantly. And that was an allegory for the power of grace. That your fire will always be faced with things that are going to try to put it out. And we all can relate to that, probably. We all have that temptation to let our spark go out just a little bit at a time. Things happen which are disappointing. Things happen which are boring. Things happen which are perhaps natural and normal, but also difficult pills to swallow. And in our lives, we're tempted to lose our passion. We're tempted to lose the desire to keep fighting forward through all of the slings and arrows that life might throw at us. And yet, grace is that fuel being added to the fire behind the scenes. I think there's a lot of power to be gained from doing something consistently and from continuing onward, even when you're tempted to let your flame go out. Maybe it's when the honeymoon phase of a relationship ends. Do you have the longevity to find a sense of devotion that endures not just for a few weeks or months, but for years or for a lifetime? Or maybe it's that favorite game that was really amazing and exciting and uplifting when you first started playing it at launch, but then years down the road you start to feel burned out. You start to feel like you're frustrated with the direction the game is going. Maybe you become tempted to quit and give up and throw in the towel. But when you pick a few things that have something good about them, something you admire, and then you make those anchors, you make them stable things that you keep investing in, you keep coming back to them, then they become something that's good in your life, a positive influence on your spirit, but not necessarily something that has to be perfect. And you learn how to forgive because it's the only path forward. You can't move forward if you don't forgive. And I think that's one reason why we struggle so much in our society today, because we have this temptation to move on whenever we start to get bored. Whenever we get a little bit discouraged, a little bit frustrated, whenever our partner, our spouse, our employer, our favorite game, whatever it might be, it doesn't matter. But whenever something gets on our nerves, we think, well, maybe I should just quit. Maybe the grass is greener somewhere else. And we have that tendency to just feel like the solution to everything is to throw in the towel, move on. And society tends to validate that notion as well. I saw something that interested me a while ago. It was a post on Facebook of someone lamenting their loneliness. They said, "My goodness, I'm so sad, so lonely, and life is so miserable because I am woefully lonely." And then a lot of people chimed in and replied to that post, and they echoed similar feelings of loneliness and that sense of fear and sadness being in so bleak a world. And then somebody made a tongue-in-cheek response to all of them and said, you know, all of you lonely people wouldn't be lonely if you all got to know each other. But you see, there's truth there, because it's one thing to complain about how lonely you are. It's another thing to actually let other people into your life. And it's quite possible that a lot of the people who will say they're victims of something deliberately go out of their way to do things which would actually change their lot in life. So you can't be resentful to other people for excluding you when you actively exclude them because you don't think that they're good enough for you. It's okay to have standards, that's fine. But you can't say you're a victim. Not when you could open the door to anyone, but you choose to be particular. You choose to be obstinate. You choose to not take action to change your situation. Well, then you can't claim to be a victim of it, can you? But what I was getting at is that we always want a convenient solution to our problems. We don't want to have to work on a solution. We want to be able to get a free pass so we don't have to deal with it. But grace isn't about getting a free pass, a shortcut to perfection. Grace is picking something that's good, something that's wholesome, and then sticking to it and continuing to invest in it and continuing to see good in it even when you're tempted not to. Grace is coming back and logging in every day even when maybe you get a little bit burned out from the grind. Grace is not necessarily jumping on the bandwagon of the latest new thing and maybe continuing to be faithful to some of the old things. Really what grace is a sort of patience. A patience with all the things in your life, to forgive the things about them that are not perfect, so that you can benefit more fully from the things which are good. And I think we could all benefit from a bit more grace in our lives. Grace to stop looking and instead to be more fully present in the place where we already find ourselves. Grace to remember the positive reasons why we set off on an adventure or a journey, so that we don't wind up turning around midway and giving up on something instead of seeing it through. Grace to put ourselves in the shoes of someone else, to understand why they might do the things they do, to try to understand what feelings drive them so to be, instead of just looking for an easy way out at the first sign of frustration or trouble or irritation. It's become, as I said, easier than ever to have less grace in our lives because society is always giving us easy crutches, easy ways to just say we're the victim and then move on. But things that endure are more important than things which are fleetingly beautiful. I think about this in gaming because so many times I felt like it's really hard to prioritize what games I want to play. It just feels like there's not enough time in the day for them all, and there's so many new releases coming out all the time. And being somebody who's into MMOs and games with expansive open worlds and lots of quests in them, it's not easy to really finish every game out there, because a lot of RPGs have so much content that if you want to pay attention to it and work through all of it, you can sink hundreds or thousands of hours into a game and not even finish all the content there. So it's hard to know what to pick, what to stick to. And then you have things that happen where maybe you don't like something about a game and you think to yourself, well, you know, I don't know if I want to stick with this because there's some things I don't like about it. And yet, the more I think of it, the more I find I come back to a few amazing titles that aren't perfect. They all have something about them that I think is a little janky, or I don't like very much, or I could throw stones at. But they all have something extraordinary about them. Something that makes me have those moments when I just get chills and think, wow, that is just a really, really amazing piece of artistic creativity that's put it all together to create this amazing world that I can be part of and immerse myself in. And that's really what counts at the end of the day. Then there's other things where maybe it's cool, but it doesn't really feel like something meaningful. I've said this before, but I think it's an amazingly good barometer for whether you should be playing a game or not, and that is, how excited would you be to have a bunch of collectibles and paraphernalia from the game decorating your shelves in your personal office or your gaming room or something? Would that feel special to you? You know, is it just a game, or is it something that feels like something more? That's a question. And I think about game worlds like Teyvat and Genshin Impact, or Middle-earth and the Lord of the Rings Online, or Tamriel and the Elder Scrolls Online. And are there things that I don't like about those games? Sure, there are. I don't really care for the level scaled combat in Elder Scrolls Online. I don't care for it particularly when I see overt woke political sort of stuff show up in a storyline or a narrative in a game like ESO. I don't care for it when I see what might be aggressive monetization, like a crafting bag that's stuck behind an ESO Plus paywall. I could throw stones at Elder Scrolls Online. But I love the open world. I love the feel of just traversing the overworld and exploring. I love the voice-acted quests. I love the 30 years of lore that back up the Elder Scrolls franchise. I love the way characters look, and I love the collectible pets, and I love the housing. And I'm sure there's quite a bit more. There's things I don't like about Genshin Impact, like, to a point, the gacha system. Games that feel like they're run on a gambling mechanic can be fun, but it also can feel like it's a sort of a slimy business model in a way, even if it's fun. It kind of makes you think, I don't know if this is the the best business model for a game. It seems to work well for Genshin Impact, but I don't necessarily fancy myself as being super crazy about a gacha game. Unless it's a gacha game that has an extremely beautiful, open, seamless world to explore. And in the case of Genshin Impact, it has amazing character design. It has a combat system I love. It has storylines which feel enjoyable to me. I care about the characters, so I have my reasons for enjoying the game. It's been a game that's been inspirational to me at different points in my life, and it still is. Lord of the Rings Online has an amazing leveling system. It has an amazing, seamless open world. It has an amazing IP to back it. And it has an amazing community. But it's also got an aging graphics engine. And it doesn't have voice acting in its quests. You know, there's things I could point out that are, again, good and bad about each particular game. But they're all games that feel meaningful to me, so I play them. Then there's other ones like maybe New World that comes to mind, or Black Desert Online, or any number of others, where I look at them and I think that seems like it should be a pretty cool game. But I just can't really get into the world, and never really feels like it's a very good experience. So some of those I let go. I don't have to dabble in everything. But the ones that are fundamentally good, just not entirely perfect, I find it's better to forgive the imperfections. Because being part of something that feels meaningful, that is a special kind of positivity to add to your life. I think, and this might be a little bit of age talking, but I think the more you go through life, the more you start to have this sense, not that your journey is over, not that you're at the end, but that you're at a point where you want to stop starting over again all the time, and you want to pick a few things and start seeing them through. And I think that's a theme that's true in so many different ways. You know, I think about my job. I think about how sometimes I feel like maybe I'd like to quit my job and do something else. Not because I don't like my job exactly, but because I could start something new. Even if it wasn't easy, I could start something new now because I'm reasonably young. But if I waited, you know, there's things that are a lot less appealing if you wait another decade or two. So, you know, sometimes there's that temptation to say you want to figure those things out, I guess, because the more time goes on, the more you don't want to be starting over at the beginning. The more you want to be able to say, you know, I'm going to see it through now. I'm going to continue what I've begun. And I guess there could be wisdom in either point of view. Sometimes there's wisdom in staying, and sometimes there's wisdom in going. And I can't counsel anyone on how you know what to do exactly. Probably the best person to ever give you advice is you. But I do think that as time goes on, whether it's the games we play or the job we have or our relationships, it increasingly becomes less about finding something new and shiny and more about staying true to something good. And I know when it comes to MMOs and RPGs, I feel that way quite a bit. I get a sense of joy and I have some satisfaction derived from feeling like I've been part of a game world consistently and will be for the foreseeable future. Maybe that's why it's so hard for new MMORPGs to get off the ground these days, because people who've already found a place where they kind of call home, they don't really want to uproot themselves and start over again. There is that. In any case, I suppose I should digress, because I've probably deviated a bit from my original talking point, but I do think it's all more or less relevant in the same ballpark. Grace isn't so much about how you walk or how you talk. It's about being consistent. It's about finding the discipline to keep adding fuel to the fire even when nature would seem to want to let it burn out. And that's sometimes easier said than done. I'm reminded of a quote describing the late Michelangelo. And it was said that at the end of his life, he destroyed all of his lesser, more inconsequential, flawed works, because he didn't want the world to know how much effort had been required to make his work appear effortless. And sometimes I think that it's amazing how difficult it can be just to do nothing. How difficult it can be just to wait with patience. How difficult it can be to see good in the world when you're tempted to be critical. To be optimistic about the things you're doing when you're tempted to want to walk away. To be graceful in every circumstance is something which is a small thing, it would seem, but in practice, it's often a monumental thing to truly do. That's one reason why I've always appreciated the character of a figure like Queen Elizabeth in England, the late Queen Elizabeth, because she might not have been so much the great statesman or politician, but she was a figurehead that represented her nation with dignity and grace, and above all, consistency. And even as she's now perished, the remembrance of her around the world has been very positive, because people appreciate someone who will always represent the better angels of our nature, to always speak out for the good, to always advocate for things which are noble and gracious. So in our lives, let's try our best to be consistent and to be patient and to stick with things, so that we can have a legacy that shows we didn't spend our whole lives searching for something that we never found, so that we can truly feel like the things we do every day add a certain ballast to our lives. There's so much change that we can't really do anything about. So much happens that's beyond our control, and so often a year from now might be so dramatically different from a year ago. The point I'm getting at is change will find you. And that's something you can't avoid. But maybe you can find a certain degree of consistency. And a big part of finding consistency in life comes from mastering the art of forgiveness in your life. Because when you forgive, it's a lot easier to stick around. It's a lot easier to stay and be understanding instead of being frustrated and wanting to find the exit at the first sign of trouble. And I think about how relationships sometimes don't last, and I think about how if we didn't have a social system which makes it easy for people to walk out on each other, I wonder how many more relationships would figure out how to make it work. If it truly was a stigma where people felt like they had to make it work. Now, I'm not saying that people should be stuck in an abusive relationship or something. It's just sometimes it's so easy for people to walk away. All it takes is that first hint that things aren't going their way. And then they hit the road. They find the next shiny thing. And maybe they regret it later on. They regret it because they realize, if only I would have just made it work. If only I would have just hung on. But then it's too late because you burn the bridge. You can't go back, right? And, it's like that with stocks. Think about it. You get a trading app on your phone and you can buy and sell stocks any day of the week, anytime. Just pull your phone out and press the button and you can buy shares of something or sell them, which is super cool. I love it. But then I think about the times back in the day when people would have to go to a bank and open a brokerage account, and they'd have to schedule a meeting or get on the phone and call their person at the bank who would figure out how to buy and sell shares in a stock if they wanted to get in or out of something. You think about those times. Well, people thought about things a lot more at that time. People treated investment with a lot more gravity, a lot more seriousness, a lot more long-term interest, because they couldn't probably just buy and sell on a whim without really thinking it through. So, in a world that's temporary, let's close with this thought. You can't build something permanent with temporary materials. So focus on building things with principles that endure. Be consistent, be forgiving. Strive to be happy, see good in the world, and pick a few things that are worth committing to. And then, if they are lovely, continue to buy them. And never count the cost. Isn't that the crux of it? At some point, you have to stop counting the cost and just carry on. As always, wherever you find yourself on your adventure, best of luck to you, and thanks for watching.